presume. Okay, so today is Wednesday the 30th, and we are back with September, and we are back with the Looking Glass. We are starting again with our series, and we are very happy to welcome here with us Dr. Wiggins, and I'm going to introduce him in a second. He has been since 2015 the head of media communications at Webster Vienna Private University, associate professor, and his research includes digital culture, new media, and strategic communication. His work has been published in competitive journals like Simulation and Gaming, New Media and Society, International Journal of Communication, and also published a monograph in 2019 by Routledge. So today, Brad is going to talk about Trumpian rhetoric, alt health, Boogaloo, and conspiratorial thinking during COVID-19. So it sounds like a very juicy topic, Brad, and we are very keen to listen to what you're going to tell us. And of course, please make sure that you are unmuted, and then we are looking forward to hear also your questions at the end of the presentation. So Brad, when you want, you can start sharing the screen.
One moment to get to the first slide. Thank you very much for the introduction. Sorry?
And then I'm going to mute myself as well.
Okay.
Now.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Sharing my screen now. You'll be seeing, yeah, you see it just fine. I'm going to maximize it. Yeah, so when Francesco asked me to do this, I wasn't entirely sure, which topic to go with. And he and I talked about it, and everyone can hear me just fine, I'm assuming, yes? Yeah, okay. So I had been working on, I have been working on several articles. I have one published that's on this related topic, more on the Trumpian rhetoric and Boogaloo, and there's other projects happening, and it's just on the one hand, I've had the kind of desire to move away from the topic, but it keeps bringing me back. It's like excuse me. It's as if it remains so fascinating that I just can't get away from it. And so it is a bit of a widespread. It's Trumpian rhetoric. I'll talk about that, of course. Alt health is not as new a concept as you might think, as what I thought. Boogaloo refers to a group of mostly disillusioned, white supremacist type, gun right oriented, gun right obsessive, usually male individuals in the US, but there are other groups like it, and one such group was mentioned by President Donald Trump yesterday in the presidential debate. And so because of that, I made a change to the presentation, the next two slides. You'll see what I mean in a moment. But the thing that really drives it, the whole thing, is this conspiratorial thinking. And yeah, so without further ado, I'll just go on to the next slide. So this was on my Instagram feed today, and it's a hashtag that I follow for research purposes. But please be aware that it can be somewhat offensive, some of the hashtags at the bottom. So that's not my opinion. It's just this is the nature of the work. Looking at these voices online, you have My Politics in 2016. Young girl wearing the MAGA hat, and then you have a very hyper-militarized current moment. And there's a lot that we could say about memes in general. One thing that I maintain, with few exceptions, is that there's always going to be some element of ideology. And I'm going to talk about that, what I mean specifically, in a bit. And the next one here, before I do that, just make sure you look at the other hashtags at the bottom. Pardon my language, but this hashtag fuck around and find out, that's not a random statement. This is a very very common rhetorical, very vitriolic, very antagonistic kind of phrase that's used within Boogaloo, within this hashtag Civil War II, and other groups. Specifically also, what Trump, this next slide. So Trump in the debate, he was asked by the moderator, Chris Wallace, to denounce white supremacy, white supremacists. He couldn't do so and didn't do so. And he went on to actually name one of the more violent groups associated with this. And if you don't believe me, look them up. They're listed by the Southern Poverty Law Center in the United States as a hate group. They're decidedly anti-Black, anti-gay, you get the idea. They're really, really violent. And this is the point too, okay? They are an organized group, as opposed to Antifa, which really isn't an organized group. It's more like an idea. So there's that later, we'll get to that and such. But Trump said to Chris Wallace, the moderator, he said, oh, I don't know, I think the Proud Boys, they're not bad. And then he said, stand back and stand by. And the implication here, I don't know if it's clear, but if you look on Twitter, Instagram, and other places, the communication was successful. What he basically is implying is that he wants, and I don't, if this sounds a bit extreme, I'm comfortable with it because I think that's where we are now. I think what he's actually suggesting through his rhetorical strategy, which is, as much as we might want to say he's an idiot or whatever, he can be really quite clever in this regard. And this is where it becomes somewhat insidious. I believe, or I claim that I think he's basically trying to get these groups to intimidate voters. And if he loses, which I don't think he will, unfortunately, I think that it will be very, very violent in the US. And I hope I'm wrong, right? But you're talking about highly disillusioned, hyper-masculine, looking at the sense of self as being very victimized. And all of that is conspiratorial, right? It's not really fact-based at all. So a little bit of shameless self-promotion, first of all, just some of my works on the general topic of memes and such. The one on my right, the Boogaloo and Civil War II, that was my most recent publication with New Media and Society. I started writing the article in January of this year, and it tackles a gun rally that occurred in Richmond, Virginia on January 20th, 2020. And, well, it gets a little complicated, but the point of it is there was another study that was done looking at a similar group, and they did a massive quantitative study. I didn't have the time or resources for that. So I did a critical discourse analysis of tweets following two specific hashtags, hashtag Boogaloo, hashtag Boogaloo 2020, and hashtag Civil War II. And what the Civil War II means is that this particular group, Boogaloo, and the Proud Boys and others, they literally mean that they're advocating a second civil war. This isn't a joke. They want insurrectionist violence in the United States, despite at the same time supporting Trump. So obviously that's a huge contradiction in terms, but so anyways, there's the book I wrote on memes and such, but the book is really less about memes. I use memes to talk about ideology, semiotics, and intertextuality. Then the memes as genre, that was the first one I did on memes with a colleague from another university, and two others at the bottom. If you're interested in any of those, I can shamelessly send them to you later. So I want to go over some key concepts before the main part of the presentation. And I ask you for your patience. I don't really know your background and some of this. I don't really know the audience necessarily. You know what your background is in the some of the terms that will come up later. So I'm not going to obviously read the slides or anything like that, but I'm going to focus on the points that I think you need to know or revisit in order to get the argument that you'll see later and the connections made. I think it's important to reflect on what culture is, that it's something that we generate day to day, and that just this image of the agricultural metaphor, so to speak, it works, but it's also what we do with our screens and our phones. That's also a kind of digital culture, which is what I mostly research. And we're producing content all the time, and it becomes somewhat problematic when we consider the sheer volume of content production. And as a consequence of that, the draw on our attention. The draw on our attention is absolutely immense. Just as a brief aside, think about all of the kind of fake news and fake news related stories and claims about COVID-19. One interesting statistic was approximately, I forget what the actual amount of real information was available on Facebook and Twitter, but apparently 4 times as much was available at the same places, took longer to take down, that was decidedly fake or misinformed or whatever. So it's important, I think, to reflect on that. This is a slide that I often would use in class, and I'm not going to ask you to think about it, but I like to, when the topic comes up, ideology, because I like to challenge the students to get them to understand or get them to communicate what they think ideology means, because what I find time and time again is they associate it with a kind of negative implication. So kind of like the way people think of the word propaganda. Propaganda is automatically negative. Not necessarily, right? So ideology is a force, and I draw primarily on the work of, to some degree, Althusser. I think that his work, though it is largely structuralist, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but this idea that ideology is a lived experience. Now, this should also remind us of culture as well. And the second point is the most important one, that better than a massive police force or
what, Google?
Hello? I thought I heard somebody talking. Okay. Anyways, that ideology itself, when it's fully functioning, let's say, it's better to, it's more effective and more powerful to maintain power on the populace. But leaving Althusser, the one I draw most inspiration from, if I could say, is actually Slavoj Žižek and his work with ideology. I could only recommend his book on the sublime object of ideology. He kind of has an extension of Althusser, and he takes it far more seriously in a sense. The two images you see there on my left is taken from 2 screenshots taken from the film The Pervert's Guide to Ideology. I don't know why it's called pervert, but whatever. Anyways, he uses film in the movie, filmic references to talk about ideology, and I think it's an absolutely brilliant work. I highly recommend it. This idea that he's already eating from the trash can all the time, and the name of this trash can is ideology. What he's trying what he's implying here is that it's extremely common, and it's something that you can easily disregard and think that it doesn't affect you. And so that's why he says, even in our dreams, or even when we think we've reached a certain level of critical thinking, we're beyond ideology, he maintains that at that point we are deeply within ideology. So the point of reason why I'm emphasizing these concepts is to make a link to what comes later, obviously. This is a nice visual representation of kind of what I'm talking about with regard to ideology, culture, but also consumption. You know what work of art this is, but it's not the original, and yet it is kind of an original. And I like to use this in the class as well when we talk about viral media or better remix culture. Because what is this? Is this Starry Night? Is it Star Wars? Is it cultural hegemony? In my opinion, yes. Is it a commodity? Is it, what is it? So all of it remixed together, I think we get at one time a kind of yeah, visual representation of ideology in action. It's very consumerist oriented, and yeah, it's just a quick example. So to move on, this slide on postmodernism, I think, is very important. I'm not going to ask you to actually do the thing that I asked my students to do, but when this topic comes up in class, I find, whether or not it has merit, I think it does, but some people disagree. I find students find it very difficult to understand. And what I do in the classroom is I get them to use their phones and to do a quick search, what they find. It just gets them doing something active learning. Yeah, so to move on, the thing about postmodernism and why it's relevant, you'll see in a couple of slides, I think, but it applies to multiple fields. It's not just media. It's as relevant to architecture and fashion as it is to media and literature. It primarily concerns Jameson and Lyotard, but also Baudrillard and of course others. And so Lyotard, wait, was it what's his name? Yeah, Jean-François Lyotard. Sorry. His rather succinct definition is, I just absolutely love it. I think it gets right to the heart of what postmodernism is. It's an incredulity toward the meta-narrative. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with Trumpian rhetoric and COVID? And you'll see. Just bear with me. So he rejects the meta-narrative. He would claim that meta-narratives like religion, like political isms, that even science itself should in a sense not necessarily be totally rejected. That might be too strong, even though that's what's in the slide. More tackled rather critically. You know, he emphasizes that science, for example, should serve humanity. But then why did we get the gas chambers from science? Why did we get Chernobyl from science? Why did we get nuclear bombs and pharmaceutical manipulation from science? And so, this is where we have some anxiety, possibly some skepticism about the role of certain meta-narratives, and a kind of breakdown of assumptions, key assumptions that were deeply held for a long time. And so he maintains that, you know, if we're going to do that, if we're going to reject the meta-narrative, then what are we filling in its space? And this is where I think he and others like him were very much ahead of their time. He talked about intertextuality, and so a lot of my work, I talk about intertexts, that there's no real original text. They're all citations or references or inspirations from other texts. It's not necessarily a novel concept in and of itself, but its application, I think, in this case actually is. So it's not so much, we shouldn't be concerned about the authorship of a particular piece of content, but rather what other references or co-references are included in order to convey the message. On a similar note, so just remember about, you know, so ideology, intertextuality. Now, Jameson, he wrote a book called The Logic of Late Capitalism. And I remember when I was a graduate student in the 90s, whenever I had to read this, I thought it was a bit strange, but I'm glad I paid attention to those lectures. Anyways, he talks a lot about pastiche. He talks a lot about bricolage and the bringing together of different pieces to make new stuff. Okay, that in and of itself isn't terribly new. One of the first instances of pastiche in this regard, or remix, is actually William Burroughs' novel. I think it's is it The Naked Lunch, or is this, I forget, there's another one where he literally takes parts of other novels, pieces them together to create a new work. So the key features of postmodernism are self-referentiality, irony, pastiche, parody, collage, simulacra, and so on. Now, a lot of those words should seem familiar to you with regard to a lot of the kind of digital content that we encounter online, and the thought, and the thought patterns or the thinking behind that production. And to the point, so his book, Postmodernism, you have on my left the real cover, and on the right you have really, I think, an absolutely perfect representation in a one image, in a sense, of what postmodernism gets to. There's nothing manipulated in that image, right? It's Donald Trump at the White House hosting a group of athletes, I forget, I think National Football League or what have you. He's serving them fast food. He's serving them Burger King, McDonald's, all kinds of things in the White House. There's a kind of Andy Warholian everyday man here, everyday person here, because of the fast food, thinking of Andy Warhol's video eating the Whopper or the Big Mac, whatever it was. And there's a deep sense of, what I get from the image is a kind of fracture of what we think is supposed to be, what we think is supposed to happen in the White House or whatever. And then you get this utter juxtaposition, a kind of carnivalesque juxtaposition of expectation. That's postmodernism, right? Yeah, and so just as a bit of fun, mocking the current occupant of the White House, if you recall his penchant for signing the executive orders, and then this was remixed online to mock him, right? To say that he's kind of like a child or something. But in that critique, and I maintain that most, if not all, memes include a kind of critique, even the funny ones, like this one. Those memes and such that tend to mock Trump do so with, appeals to an idea that he's an idiot or that he's like a child or whatever. Yet those produced by his supporters, such as by the Boogaloo or the Proud Boys, as you'll see later, that it's absolutely vitriolic, it's misogynistic, it's homophobic. I mean, it's like to the extremes of all this like hate. Whereas those who oppose Trump, it doesn't go that far. At least I haven't seen very many. I'm sure they might exist, but in terms of patterns, I don't see that kind of vitriol on that side whatsoever. And I think that matters. I think that speaks to, with among Trump supporters, a desire for negotiating their identity, for consolidating their identity, but defining who they are by mocking through vitriol and hatred who they are not, right? Okay, in order to go on, I need to talk about this slide. I think it's my original concept. I'm not sure. I think maybe, but this Time magazine cover happened last year. I think July of 2019 or 2018 now? I'm not sure. Come to think of it, it's a little blurry. This was at the height of the family separation at the U.S.-Mexico border. The reason why this is so important, and I show this in the classroom, and I've shown it at conferences and such, and the reaction is quite stunning sometimes. You get that aha moment in people's faces, and I hope that it does that for you too. So this child in the center, this child was in fact taken from her father, or no, from the mother, but then returned, and it was some kind of a mistake. It was some kind of a misunderstanding, and the child's screaming, crying, and the photographer was in the right place at the right time, and took this photo. And Time magazine posted it as a expression of the kind of horror of what it is to separate families at the border. And I think it's especially interesting to have Trump on the side, not quite in the picture. He's not quite dealing with it, looking downward. All that's very interesting. But, and this is where it gets maybe most intriguing, it was hailed as fake news by anyone who supports Trump. And in a sense, both sides are absolutely correct, because in a very literal sense, this child was not separated from her family. It was a mistake. There was some kind of it was some kind of a marital spat, I believe, between the mother and the father of the child, and it was a bad. The photographer, like I said, was the right place at the right time. But for those on the other side, it does have meaning. It does have very powerful meaning that it's still true in a sense. And so here this is where it gets, I think, complicated, because you have both happening at the same time. You have like two co-truths at the same time, and as a consequence, a kind of encouragement to further retreat into your echo chamber or whatever you want to call it. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a kind of breakdown in civil discourse and almost like a hyperpolarization of politics. To drive the point home a little further, what I call this is a bifurcation of meaning, or meaning bifurcation. And to me, this is very strategic. I think this is very, very strategic. On my left is Obama as Joker, then you have Trump as Joker. Now, back in 2008, or was it 2009? I think it was 2008, actually. A young man, a young Palestinian American, I forget his last name, it's in my book, and he took the kind of iconic hope image of Obama and remixed it into Joker. And his reasoning at the time was he just was annoyed by the optimistic, hopeful messaging. He wasn't necessarily hateful of Obama, he just was critical. And it was at a time when social media usage wasn't nearly as deeply saturated and pervasive as it is today. Yet the image was taken up by the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party movement is a very right-wing, right of center, largely white-oriented individuals who advocated that they're kind of like a silent majority in a kind of Nixonian sense. And those same people, one can make the argument, became Trump supporters about 8 years later. But it also works because it shows Obama as thug, as black man, as criminal, and it works. It's obviously racist. It's obviously to be used against him like that. There's nothing positive about it. You fast forward to 2016, and the exact same Joker image, the Heath Ledger Joker, is used about Trump, shared pretty widely in the right corners of the internet, but done to his support. They see him as an agent of chaos. They see him as the wild card. So you have the same iconic image, and yet it can mean completely different things for different purposes at different times. And I call it the bifurcation of meaning, and I think it's a hallmark of what we're experiencing these days. Okay, so that to the main core of the presentation. This is just a rehashing of the abstract. Excuse me, a little parched. Let me think here. This last sentence, I think, is very, very important. Because of COVID's problematic politicization, there has been a kind of development of conspiracy absent of theory. And what I mean by that, let's check in the time. Oh my, should I hurry up a little bit because of the time? Yeah, okay. I'll go on forward then. So I would encourage you, if you want to know more about QAnon, to look at this article. It's through The Atlantic. I highly recommend it. QAnon is a group that I'll talk about more in a moment. They're not right-wing or alt-right, they're just pro-Trump, okay? And to go even further, QAnon it has all the makings of being a kind of new American religion. There's a term called conspiratoriality, which I'll talk about later too, that's very central to QAnon and related concepts. This image was taken from the Trump presidential website. This is not a doctored image. If you take it literally, what this means is he's asking his supporters to stand with him against those who would oppose fascism, Antifa. Whatever your feelings about Antifa are, this is really quite, I think it's quite shocking in a sense. And here are some of the examples that were in my one of my articles that's actually, I think, currently under review. It was an analysis of the hashtag Civil War II on Instagram. I had looked at Twitter, then I wanted to look at Instagram because a lot of the far right groups have migrated away from Facebook and Twitter, and they've gone to Instagram. There's also Parler, P-A-R-L-E-R, that's a kind of alt-right, far-right Twitter in and of itself. But on Instagram, you can follow some of these posts, and the group's name 3% Nation, that it is a reference to yet another one of these far-right groups. So the implication here is obviously very homophobic, and I would say also somewhat misogynistic, probably also body shaming as well. And you can see from some of the other hashtags used, you can see the kind of person who's making this post. Second Amendment refers to the gun rights in the United States. This is a kind of a classic, iconic image of Boogaloo. And Boogaloo refers to, literally refers to a dance movement from the 1960s and the 1980s. But it's been co-opted to mean basically a group of disaffected, disillusioned white men who quite literally are advocating a civil war. And they tend to use the same imagery. This sort of like night vision goggle hat, Hawaiian t-shirts are often used. The Gadsden flag, that's the flag, the yellow flag with the snake that says "Don't tread on me." They use these images not accidentally, but rather intentionally. And all of this together forms a kind of alternative discourse in a sense. And this gun owners actually were all tickled to hear you say that. This is very aggressive. I mean, it's within the group. I think that they might laugh about this, but standing outside of someone reading this, reading it culturally, I see this as very violent and very aggressive. It's the same thing here. You have that the VA, Virginia Democrats threatened to use National Guard against the sanctuary counties. Sanctuary county, to basically make it short, is counties that want to reduce the number of like military grade rifles and such. And a Chad is usually is so complicated. It's a word that's used to usually mock men who are very good looking, and its use here is almost doubly ironic, like against the self, because the young man is you know, he looks a little big. But this demand to get the Hawaiian shirts, this is a clear reference to Boogaloo. This is a reference to getting action, get organized, stand up, be seen. You see some of these other hashtags here. Taxation is half theft. Jeffrey Epstein. Climate change isn't real. I mean, this is just oozing with conspiracy theory. Okay, so now to Q. I would caution you, if you're interested in QAnon, it's a hell of a fascinating and disturbing rabbit hole to fall into. The thing that I'm going to draw your attention to is that it's not really a structured organization. Q simply refers to the very first post that was used, I think, on 4chan perhaps, and the user's name was simply Q, and that turned into a kind of nebulous, rhizomatic, decentralized group called QAnon, Anon for Anonymous. Trump and others in his administration have retweeted QAnon tweets, hashtag QAnon tweets. And like I said before, it's not about being right or far right. They're just pro-Trump, no matter what, almost in a kind of messianic religious way. And I'm not the only one saying that. There are others who are making the exact same argument. And further, it's emblematic of this term conspirituality. Now, on this term, it's important to take a moment here. I thought that was a new term. I had heard this recently on a podcast, and it was introduced as a new term. It's not. I did some research, and you see at the bottom, there's the emergence of conspirituality. In that article I read, I have it right over there, It's about the kind of alt health movement from the early 2000s. And even before that, what was used to be called the New Age movement, crystals and sort of incense and yoga, but yoga plus believing in some kind of great world connection or whatever. The idea is that once you begin some magical thinking about crystals or the healing power or doubting vaccines, other conspiratorial lines of thought become really, really easy. And so in the article, it has two core convictions of conspirituality. And this again is from 2011. It's quite a different world back then compared to now. So a secret group covertly controls the political and social order, and humanity is undergoing a paradigm shift in consciousness. I mean, this is exactly the kind of stuff that Q is talking about all the time. This is obviously also what Trump's talking about. He refers to a deep state, yet he's the president of the United States. He talks about voter fraud, not because there's going to be any voter fraud, because he wants people to doubt truth all the time. That's his main rhetorical strategy, that and repetition. Repetition, even if it's a bald-faced lie, it just repeat it and don't stop for a moment. And his supporters, his followers, especially within Q, they it's as if he can't do any wrong. It's as if yeah, it's been fascinating. They emerged in 2016. And I know at this point I might seem like this guy, this sort of conspiracy theory, there's all these connections, but it's serious. You know, this, I take it very seriously, and there needs to be more attention paid to it. So what is all the different connecting points here? Why did I call it this title? I think to make it as succinct as possible, it's these 5 points. Trumpian rhetoric is defined by denial of truth, except if it's his truth. And his truth I would put in lowercase t. It's whatever's convenient at the time. It's repetitious. Listen to him, listen to a given speech or whatever. Not whenever it's scripted, but whenever he's off script. He'll just keep repeating the same thing, build the wall or whatever. And his supporters, whether they're wearing MAGA hats or they're QAnon supporters, they get the message. The second point, adherence to conspiratorial thinking. This idea is that, so there are real conspiracies, right? There was a conspiracy to kill Hitler, right? Von Stauffenberg, right? There was a conspiracy about possibly was it the Cuban Missile Crisis, what came before that. There were conspiracies and real conspiracies, yet this kind of conspiratorial thinking is without any theory, without any evidence. For example, all the claims about 9/11, that it maybe was an inside job or whatever, that maybe it was they used some kind of a special chemical to take the building down. That even has more merit than some of the more crazy conspiracy theories that are emerging these days, because at least that begins almost a kind of quasi-scientific process to have a kind of informed debate about it. This type of conspiratorial thinking is just adherence to the ideological frame, adherence to Trumpian ideology. And that's largely also defined by a very hyper-masculine and by consequence misogynistic, white-oriented assumptions of victimization. Think about what happened in Charlottesville in 2017. There were neo-Nazis marching with torches, and they said, "We will not be replaced." This is a very real conspiracy assumption in the various groups, where they literally do believe that a Jewish cabal or a Muslim cabal is working to replace white people. The same theory exists in the European context with the so-called Kalergi plan. I won't spend much time on that, but it accomplishes the same thing. It was an Austrian diplomat from the early part of the 20th century, and it gained resurgence in 2015 with the refugee crisis. It was as if the conspiracy theory had become true because of the kind of increase in Muslims and replacing people. there's always going to be a denial of an aspect of science. And if you can deny climate change, climate change, then you can deny COVID. You can deny that Bill Gates didn't cause it. Yeah. And so what that leads to is a penchant for magical thinking. Like Trump has said that many times. He says this in conferences, press conferences early on in 2020. He said that, you know, COVID will just disappear. It'll disappear by Easter. I mean, this, if you consider for a moment that that's a kind of magical thinking, his supporters believe it, and whatever else happens, it was his enemies, or their enemies, and that's the main struggle, I suppose. Here we have two tweets that Trump retweeted. The one on the left, where you have the large panel of politicians. This was retweeted by an account, excuse me, that's that's hugely QAnon centric. And this other phrase, "nothing can stop what's coming," just to go back to this slide, that's a very key statement within QAnon. This idea of hashtag where we go one, we go all at the top, WWG1WGA. This is a kind of an artifact of the alt health movement. It's almost like a yoga centric idea, but they've co-opted it to mean we need to band together because they, whoever they might be, are going to come and get us. And nothing can stop what's coming is also very QAnon. The fact that he retweeted it suggests either he understands what this is about, which I tend to think is the case, or maybe he's just playing with his supporters. But this playing of the fiddle, the violin, I think it's mature, which one, is a reference to Emperor Nero, who apparently played the fiddle while the city burned. And this idea of the leader not caring, this is directed at enemy, whoever the enemy might be. Maybe it's the gays, maybe it's the blacks, maybe it's whatever. And this sort of smug look. So I took a look at that Twitter account, and this is the person's Twitter page, this sort of like ultimate warrior American remix of President Trump. And one of the most recent tweets was of Anthony Fauci, because if you see the Time magazine cover, once again, you have a kind of assumption that Anthony Fauci is a demon, is a devil, and they mean this literally. Okay, they as crazy as it might sound, they think that the position of Anthony Fauci on the cover suggests that they're not hiding the truth, that the truth is quite plain, that in fact he is some kind of a demon or a devil or what have you. All right, moving on to some of the COVID related memes and posts from Instagram. I would prefer it if this didn't have any text on it at all, because I think it would be far more effective. The intention here, I think, is clear, that why should we wear this cloth mask whenever we're using masks for other purposes? It has to be far more sturdy. And it's a fallacious argument that it's easily reproduced. Yeah, it doesn't require you to question it. It reinforces what you already suspect. It works. This is another one. It's not really what I can consider a meme, but whatever. And this is a really good example of the kind of, screwed up logic within the group. Whether it's QAnon, Boogaloo, doesn't really matter, Civil War II. It's this, and that is a true figure, by the way. There were 1.5 million deaths of tuberculosis, but it's completely devoid of context. It doesn't take into consideration that those deaths occurred primarily in the poorer corners of the world. Yeah, and it just, and in doing so, it uses a kind of a partial scientific fact to prop up batshit crazy claims, essentially, right? This is one of my favorites. This is at the core of this is this assumption that Bill Gates is behind COVID-19, and that there will be a required chip inserted in people to commence business or whatever. And this also is funny because they're sharing this with their phone, and yet their phones have the chip. We can tell where people are through their phones, and that fact is ignored. And so that what they have instead is fear and anxiety. And yeah, this one's fantastic. I have the red circle around some of the more disturbing hashtags. You see hashtag where we go one, we go all, hashtag save the children. Now this is really central to QAnon. They literally believe that Hillary Clinton and you know the Democrats are a bunch of satanic cannibals who eat children, who harvest children's blood and adrenal gland for you know, nefarious purposes. And I know it sounds absolutely insane, but what they do is they use that sense of excuse me, that kids are being abused and trafficked, and that does exist. But instead of focusing on the real world aspect, they drum up just hocus pocus stories about a perceived enemy. And there's no discussion, there's no discourse about it, there's no searching for real research. And this FEMA Walmart thing, this hits it very, very well because of the this assumption that people are going to be locked up eventually because of, you know, the deep state. It fits, it works very, very well with it. And this other one, Pizzagate is real. Pizzagate was one of these first QAnon events where a gentleman went into a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. that was assumed to be the headquarters of the child trafficking ring. And he went in there armed. And I don't believe anyone was hurt, but he had the intention of doing so. And this was a guy who had a pretty normal existence up to that point in time. But he decided, he believed the QAnon conspiracy so much, he got into his car and drove for miles to free children who were being locked in the basement. So that's the presentation. I've touched on a lot of topics, and I hope that I've drawn the connections, that I've made the connections that I've hoped to do, at least. And I'd like to open up for questions.
Thank you, Brad. Maybe you can stop sharing so that we can.
Yeah. Just how do I just stop sharing?
I think I can also do it for you. I think.
Okay.
You see, it's dictatorial. I have the control of everything here, almost everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, it's very extensive, and you touch a lot of points. Starting from the general introduction of cultural studies, and you know, from Althusser, and I think it's a good point for people who are not familiar with their philosophies and ideas. I have some questions, but I want to open first to the audience. If there are questions.
I have a question.
I have a question.
Oh, Juliana as well.
Sorry.
I knew.
Of course, nobody says anything, and then everybody wants to say something at the same time. Thanks, Brad. That was really enlightening. I especially enjoyed the end of your presentation with those incredible, you know, horrifying, I should also say, examples of posts. I was intrigued by many things you said, but one of the things I wanted to ask you about as I was listening was something you said about these posts migrating from Facebook to, say, Instagram, for example. And I was wondering if you could explain and talk a little bit about why that might be. Is it Zuckerberg was sort of cracking down on stuff on Facebook, and now it's migrating to Instagram, but he also owns that. So I was wondering, like, why, you know, Instagram, in your opinion? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I think The restrictions that emerged as a result of Russian interference in 2016 has something to do with it, because there were, I forget the exact number, I think it's a couple of thousand of Facebook pages that were created. I have a couple of screenshots of one. It was called The Heart of Texas, and it was very clearly produced by people who don't speak English as a native language. And but the migration or whatever to Instagram, it's been covered in the mass media as well. I don't know if it's because of one particular thing. I tend to think because of Instagram's inherently visual nature, that's why it works. To me, that makes the most sense. It doesn't require a lot of the discourse. Of course, you can comment on things, but it's different than Facebook in that regard. You've got people's stories to watch. The tagging, of course, is still a thing, very much so on Instagram. And you certainly have far right corners on Twitter as well. And there are other platforms that are actually decidedly far right wing, like Parler's one, Gab is another one. But I think it's the visual nature. I think it has an attractive allure to possibly what's the word? You know, as a kind of lure, as a kind of hook to get someone to stay. And also, I've noticed that when the mainstream media talk about, say, Boogaloo, they usually forget about Instagram, or if they do, it's a very quick mention. I get the impression that it's not getting the attention that it deserves. But if I had to sum it up in one phrase, I think it's because of the visual nature of Instagram, and yeah, that's why.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
If I may add something on Instagram, I mean, speaking with my students who are younger than me, it's also the social media right now, and I think that one of the things that I'm usually talking in my classes about is the fact that we are in a visual society, so we are losing somehow the tendency of writing much. We write posts, but I mean, unless you're writing for in general, I was talking about this yesterday, and we're not writing letters in general, letters the way we used to do 100 years ago. So the visual aspect in society is pretty important. I think it's, and of course it's, Instagram is actually incorporating all these aspects. And I think you're right, the visual aspect is particularly important.
There's one thing I forgot, sorry. Instagram visual, yes, but even more so is TikTok. I'm looking at that as well. It's highly performative. And there's one article I recently reviewed for a journal that makes a very, very clever argument that pretty much everything on TikTok is a kind of meme because it's so performative, it's so repetitive, it's so cyclic. And you can look up hashtag Boogaloo, hashtag Civil War II on TikTok, and there are some crazy, I mean, out of the, just wild stuff there. And I'm thinking about maybe looking at TikTok as well, but I need to take a break from this stuff.
No, I think the TikTok is the Instagram 2.0, if I may. I mean, it's the evolution of a still image. And of course, even in Instagram now, you have moving images more and more. But yeah, TikTok is a kind of an interesting feature which needs to be investigated even more, I think. Tim, you wanted to ask something before?
Yeah, I'm just curious about the size of these communities because, well, I really don't know how big they are. How many people are in them?
It's a great question. It depends on how you want to quantify it. You can look at the various group pages. It was earlier this year, it was while I was working on the draft of the article, Facebook took down several hundred pages and also accounts on Instagram that had the hashtag Boogaloo, because I think it was the FBI who identified it as a potential terrorist group and or hate group. And so there was a takedown. So I kicked myself because I wanted to take screenshots of their home pages to get a sense, but there were anywhere from a few thousand to tens of thousands of people. And you can also look on Twitter. You could just look at the hashtags themselves, and you see the kind of engagement. It's astonishing. You know, if you're looking for an actual number, I'm not sure if I can give you that, but one takeaway is the confluence of alt health, adherence to Trump, whatever Trump says, COVID, conspiracy thinking in general, that there's a cabal of evil people eating children over. All of this mixes together, and there's like a little piece for anyone who believes a part of it. And I'm sorry to make this connection, but that was probably when I was an undergraduate at the University of Pittsburgh. It was this it's called the package theory, the package idea, that was used to describe how Nazism worked so well. That you might not have been an anti-Semite, but you needed a job, so you went along with it. You know, it's like there's just a little bit for everyone, and it became over time normalized.
And there's not people trolling into this, right? They're not. I mean, how much sort of people aren't using it as to be provocative. They really believe it, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, I think there's some trolling, of course, but the deeper, trying to think how to say this, like the people who post things like hashtag climate change isn't real and hashtag I don't know, Civil War II. I think it's all that they have. I think these are people who, I know what it's like to live in the U.S. I mean, these are probably people who don't really have a lot to look forward to. They're probably well armed. They go to church every week, maybe twice a week. There's not much for them. I lived in Arkansas for 4 years, and I kind of know people like that. You know, it's I'm not excusing it. It's just I think that it is very real, and it's not just in the U.S. QAnon's huge in Germany. It's very popular among the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, and it's a huge problem. I'm not entirely sure how to combat it other than media literacy, writing articles, doing looking glass talks. But I you know, it's like a hydra. You know, you cut off one head and then 10 more pop up somewhere else. It's challenging.
I think we have a question from Sarah and Glenn. You want to ask a question?
Go first, Sarah.
You're muted.
Okay.
Are you asking a question? Go ahead, sorry.
I'll unmute myself. Sorry about that. Thanks, Brad, for a very interesting and completely terrifying talk, to be honest. I wanted to ask you basically two questions. One is that I've been following somewhat some of this, and for me, a key moment that scared me recently was when Obama mentioned conspiracy theories in one of his addresses. And that being acknowledged by him in that way seemed to make it more come to life and give it more credence. So I was wondering what you thought about that. Does that give this, does this add fuel to the fire? Especially in light of what you were saying about ideology, that we can't escape it, we're always on the inside. So having given a terrifying presentation, maybe you just address some of that right now, but can you give us any hope? If we're always stuck within the ideology, where is the space potentially for resistance? The other aspect I wanted to ask you about that I find interesting, that came up a couple of times, and I wonder if you have anything more to say about that, is gender. Because you mentioned a couple of times that this is, and it is, looking at those images, hypermasculine, heteronormative kind of discourse that's being put forward in the images and in the terms. And Chad, I think, comes from the incel movement as well. So there seems to be a kind of insidious gender aspect, and obviously gender is always linked with politics. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, if you have anything more to say on kind of a gender analysis of all of this. And if you can leave us with any hope, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
A tall order, to be sure. I'm not familiar with Obama's invocation of or use of the term conspiracy theory. However, I think that we shouldn't shy away from it. I don't think we should. I think we need to be a little bit more bold, and the we there are, by we I mean those people who are concerned about this, those people who have more of a tendency to do hashtag Black Lives Matter than hashtag Civil War II. That's what I'm talking about, okay? Or hashtag Me Too, as opposed to, I don't know, something really offensive. Giving you hope, ideology in and of itself is not a bad thing. I didn't want to give you the wrong impression. It's just that the reason why I emphasized or talked about Althusser and Zizek and so is because through my own work in the book, but also elsewhere, I had difficulty understanding what the point of it was. Like I thought, okay, I'm not doing this stuff if I can't answer that simple question. You know, what is the point of these people, whether it's people with hashtag Me Too, hashtag Love is Love, hashtag Civil War II, whatever. What is the point? And then it occurred to me what Judith Butler talks about with regard to gender, and also Giddens talking about identity, and a few others. It's performative, and it's what I call ideological practice. I think that ideology isn't sufficient to say just that term. I think it has kind of a negative connotation, but it's practiced, it's enacted. That's why the first slide was about culture. Maybe I didn't make that clear enough, but it's enacted. Yeah, it's these hashtags, these provocations. It's ideology in action, and if Obama talks about it or Bill Gates or whomever, great. I think we shouldn't shy away from it, and give you hope. Oh, good God, I don't know. Just stay there. Don't go to the U.S.
Glenn, you had a question before, and then
yeah. Thanks again. Hi, it's Glenn. I'm you don't know me, Brad, but I'm giving some courses at Webster in communication. Actually, my question was, I was very interested also about more the question of fashion, as I often like wear Hawaiian shirts, and of course, those who know the Proud Boys know they've taken on the shirts of Fred Perry, who is actually a sort of iconic mod fashion shirt. You know, the mods in the UK. I'm just wondering. It's like, you know, the next time I put on a Hawaiian shirt and someone takes a picture of me, you know, how they take on these sort of you know, fashion items and also music and whatever. And you know, then people unknowingly, you know, they wear these things. Like all the mods in the UK, they still wear Fred Perry shirts, and they're very popular at Paul Weller concerts and whatever. But I'm just wondering, you know, how much it will really influence, you know, people, you know, not wearing these things or being aware, oh God, you know, I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt, you know. That was just a sort of my simple question.
Yeah, it's a good question. First, you know, there's so much to unpack with a lot of this, and I hope you can appreciate that. I had to make some critical choices of things not to mention and so on. But regarding the Fred Perry or the Hawaiian shirts, you can look it up too. Do a search for Proud Boys and Fred Perry shirts. They have recently stopped producing the shirts that the Proud Boys use because, sorry, they're basically the same as the black shirts of Mussolini's fascist movement. And the point here is that it's ritualized. It becomes a kind of ceremony, kind of mythological ceremony, where there's really no difference between posting something with Pepe the Frog or Boogaloo, whatever, and wearing a swastika, in my opinion, or wearing the Ku Klux Klan outfit. It's costume oriented, it's ritualized, and it offers an opportunity to wear like a uniform, to be part of a group. I mean, it happened in the 30s. It's happening kind of now too. It's just not top down necessarily, although we see some of that with Trumpian rhetoric. In terms of should we stop wearing Hawaiian shirts or so, there was an article, I think in the Times, maybe the Washington Post, that talked exactly about that. And the argument was from a person who has been studying this for years, and she said, no, wear your Hawaiian shirt. Make it still mainstream. Don't shy away from it. You know, don't let them, whoever they are, don't let them take it from you. You take it from them. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the questions.
Thanks, that's reassuring.
Any other quick comment?
I just wanted to say that what you were just talking about then, it reminded me of this British comedian called Richard Herring, who did a whole series about trying to get back some of the worst things in society and to put them back in the mainstream. It's worth listening to. But he has like an episode about trying to get toothbrush moustaches back into fashion, and another one about, you know, it's a very good series. You should there's a podcast of it. You should listen to it if you've got time. Richard Herring, it's called, his name.
If you could send me a link, maybe. I'm sure I'll probably forget. Richard
I'll send
Herring.
you a link. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. You'll like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I could do that. I don't think I could wear the mustache. I don't think I could do that. Not in Austria. I think it's a really bad idea. So.
Okay. I think we're going to stop here. I want to thank you very much, Brad, for your talk, for answering the questions. I think we had quite a good number of questions at the end, and I'm sure that if we keep it open, we end up at midnight or something like this. So I have to stop. But it's definitely a crucial issue, and I think there's a lot of material that it's getting exploited actually by different sizes. I mean, different sites or different colors, and that's. I just one quick comment. I did one of my first, the first actually, the Looking Glass event was me talking about images and media photographs used on media in Italy at the beginning of the COVID-19, and I was fascinated / impressed by the misuse and abuse of images to reinforce certain messages. I'm not saying which kind of messages, because I don't want to say something is true or not or whatever, but how much images are used, and text with images, of course, to support certain points. And it's tough to control that. You need to have a certain kind of cultural background to make sure that you are able to analyze these messages. And that's quite complicated, because I think the point what I'm doing is that sometimes there are forces that are pushing for people not to know.
Yeah.
We have access. We have a big access to information, and then I think that our society is not really always updated to what happens.
Could you say one more thing?
Yes.
I just recalled, I don't think I answered Sarah's question about gender, but yeah, I'm sorry about that. I could maybe I'll share something with you later. Okay. But yeah, it's definitely a part of that, of course. Thanks.
With pleasure. That's fine with me, Brad. We can carry on the conversation.
Sarah, do you want to announce the Spotlight Seminars, our next event happening on November 12th, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So another challenge that we're faced with today, with the quantity of information that is available to us, is the challenges also that journalists face in practicing their profession. So we're going to hold a hybrid event on November the 12th. But one of the speakers, at least, will be Gaëtan Vanet, who's a very experienced journalist. He's worked for Swiss Radio and other outlets. He's been a war reporter in places such as the Ukraine, and he's a big He's always a fascinating speaker on the challenges that journalists face today, basically. And we rely on journalists more and more to make sure we have access to accurate information and serious reporting. And in the past, he's spoken about the threat of a decline in kind of what he calls on the boots reporting, because it's increasingly difficult for reporters to go to the ground to find out what's happening. He himself managed somehow to go to Syria at a time when there were very few journalists in Syria, precisely for that reason. So he's somebody who, what do you call it? He does what he says. So I'm curious to hear him speak about the challenges faced by journalists today and what it means to be a journalist today. Everybody, people listening now or people who might be watching this back is very welcome to join us on November 12th at 6:30 for that event.
Yeah, we'll be hybrid, right? On campus and online.
So we hope many people would join. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you.